G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here with God Forbid the End is Nigh, Comparative Theology, Part 3.
Of religion, that must be fascinating for you, that you can see a religion begin, grow, die, as distinct from, say, the cult of Christianity, where 2,000 years has left so much to be forgotten, so many sources yet to be found, and so forth.
Yes, of course, there are some fancy anthropologists like Marvin Harris, for example, who says that early Christianity was a cargo cult. The point is, in the ancient world, there would be materialist expectations like we find with cargo cults, and we must never forget that. Certain followers of Jesus might have imagined the coming of a time of plenty. This is the early heresy of a man called Cerinthus. But you can see that many people come to hope, and the sociology of monism is always to be understood as a promise of hope that will actually hold with groups and can hold for a long time until disillusionment comes.
And of course, a modern example of that is prosperity gospel teaching in certain Christian churches. That if you're faithful and tithe to God, it'll come back to you, 100-fold or 1,000-fold in terms of material blessings.
That's the cargo.
Yeah, that's right. Pure cash.
But Robin Whittaker, what do you think about the idea that your faith, the origins of Christianity, may have been cultish, even cargo cultish?
Oh, I have no problem with thinking of them as cultish. I think that's certainly how they were viewed from those outside Christianity. In the first couple of centuries, we get Christians viewed with huge suspicion. The surrounding culture actually called them atheists because they didn't believe in the Greco-Roman gods. They were viewed as cannibals because they weirdly gathered to eat flesh and drink blood, which contemporary Christians might understand as a reference to communion or the Eucharist, but of course in their own cultural time and place this was just seen as weird. I think we need to be a little cautious as a method about studying a contemporary cult like a cargo cult and too quickly saying, well, that explains how Christianity could have flourished. It's possible, but there's also a lot of other factors at play in terms of culture and history and so on.
On our end, it is, God forbid, from the end-time predictions of the least technologically advanced societies in Melanesia. Next, we look at 21st century millenarianism in the West. As the new millennium loomed in the year 2000, do you remember there was genuine panic in some quarters about an impending technological collapse? The Y-2K bug, the computer coding glitch that many predicted would bring the world's governments and infrastructure to a terrifying halt. Computers would shut down on New Year's Eve, we were told, when their clocks clicked over from the year 99 to the year 00. Well, historian Richard Lampers spoke to our end just before New Year's Eve, year 2000, and he said America was fertile ground for fear, with high religiosity, a tech-dominant culture, and a predilection for conspiracy theories.
American culture is riddled with conspiracy thinking, and popular culture has gotten it with the X-Files and with Oliver Stone movies and so on. That's a dangerous path for millennialism to travel, because generally when you're a conspiracist, you think in terms of us and them, and you think in pretty violent terms, and you project onto other people the desire to enslave everybody, and eventually you come up with the only response is we have to enslave them before they enslave us, and we get Nazis. So that's not a particularly useful path to follow. There are other paths that it can follow, including communitarianism and sort of public celebrations, and that's what we see in the year 1000, and we see it in the Great Awakening movements in America and so on. So that's another trail that we want to follow, and certainly there are all these big demonstrations, million people gatherings and so on that are planned for New Year's Eve, and for the summer we're going to have we're going to have a new round of Earth Days and so on. So we'll keep track of all this stuff. Jubilee year in Rome is going to be a sort of 1 year long multi-million person gathering. Jerusalem, same thing, although obviously a lot more tension. So we're tracking all this stuff. Now, when we decided to track this, we saw these elements, but we didn't see Y-2K. And Y-2K is the great apocalyptic prophecy of the age. It's something that you don't have to be religious to get worried about it. And as a result, as Y-2K approaches and as they get more and more nervous about what it can mean, we're going to see sort of both religious and secular groups behaving in apocalyptic fashions.
That's historian Richard Landers, former director of the Center for Millennial Studies at Boston University. Gary Trump, the Y-2K bug that didn't bite.
Well, that's right. I can remember vividly going up to the top story of Deutsche Bank and asking the managing director there, who was the troubleshooter for the state on Y-2K, about his opinion as to what was going to happen. That was a very eerie experience.
But there was no problem because the bug turned out to be overblown, not because the collective humanity had done so much to solve it.
There was preparation to make sure that this bug did not have its effect. So there was thought put into the problem.
Oh, yes, I mean, the US government had assigned it to the department that precedes the Department of Homeland Security. They had this special task force. And
Okay, that's right.
but we know planes didn't fall from the sky, trains didn't crash. You know, there wasn't lava flowing in the streets.
This is the moment of disillusionment.
It's ironic that one would be disillusioned about averted catastrophe.
You don't think, do you, that everybody wants catastrophe in the bottom of their hearts as possibly signaling the end? I mean, everybody gets scared. Part of the problem here is pictures of the end that are very discomforting. Whether they're going to be around the corner with a typhoon, or whether the earth is going to end with nothing but a bunch of cockroaches.
So, Robin Whittaker, I mean, with the Y-2K fear, it was a secular fear, but do you remember it sharing elements of, religious apocalypticism, millenarianism?
Not in my immediate Christian circles, but they were certainly out there, partly because there are these Christian beliefs that there will be an end time. And historically, the first time Christians got pretty worried about this millennium was the year 1000. So we saw some of those same concerns. Well, if it didn't happen in the year 1000, what about the year 2000? And the manifestation of those fears just looked a bit different because now we had technology to worry about and our bank accounts and electronic software bugs and so on. But in the year 1000, there was equally a lot of apocalyptic expectation that the 1,000 years since Jesus was going to be over, the world would come to an end. And it made the book of Revelation a very popular text in that period. But it's not just the 1000. I lived in America during 2012, and I remember some colleagues who worked around the university being genuinely worried about the Mayan prophecy that 2012 was the end of the world.
Right.
And they'd come and ask me about this, and I'd say, what are you reading? I really don't see any reason to be concerned. But of course, with information these days and American conspiracy theories looming large, they were reading all these apocalyptic websites that were convincing them. I mean, people mount convincing arguments, and the rhetoric works.
Well, the great issue of today is climate change, and in a way, like religion, it deals with the destiny of humankind. Gary Trump, are climate scientists now making the predictions of doom that used to be made by clerics?
Oh, that's interesting. Well, don't forget that some of these people who are making these predictions hold very strong religious opinions. So don't think that all these predictors are just secular.
But then the environmental movement wouldn't like you saying there's a religious component to their campaign against global warming, because they would see it as diminishing the scientific authenticity of their argument, no?
Well, maybe they would keep their religion under the hat in case misunderstandings come in. And per contra, you've got people who are climate change deniers who want to argue, if they're conservative Christians, look, God's got it all in hand anyway. That's dangerous thinking, by the way.
Very dangerous thinking, this idea in Christianity that if God's going to intervene in some future, we can basically say it doesn't matter what we do right now. It's quite irresponsible.
So, Robin, even if you believe what most climate scientists say, do you still nonetheless, though, detect an end-of-days flavour to some of the predictions?
That's a really hard question to answer, James. I I believe there is real science behind the climate change speculations we're getting, and where we see the apocalyptic fervour might be in the way they're being expressed.
Especially because scientists who would originally express them 10 years ago, 15 years ago, so conservatively and so technically, and as each year has gone by with less and less government action, they feel this need to speak more strongly and passionately and, dare I say, biblically about these things.
That's right. They've got to amp up the rhetoric to get people to listen, and people tend to not act on the basis of fear, and it's primarily being appealed to on the grounds of fear. We should be afraid of what's going to happen to our world. But people don't respond to fear as a motivator unless they feel that that's something very close, it's imminent. We don't fear things 100 years hence. And perhaps bringing in some kind of biblical ideas there, or biblical language, and of course not exclusively biblical. This is language that it's now just been co-opted in our Western tradition, and so much literature and so many movies about the end of days and post-apocalyptic worlds. But we could say there's a similar ideology going on behind it.
Very true.
If you don't work towards the best society possible, and you muck up the environment, then things will get wrecked. And your utopian or optimistic dream will be dissolved. This is structurally parallel to the idea of a time of tribulation. You know, any image like Jonathan Shell in his book The Fate of the Earth, that a nuclear bomb will go off, and what will a nuclear winter be like, is structurally related to the idea of this terrible kind of thing that will happen at the end of times, according to traditional religion. Why I emphasize comfort is there is complete discomfort from the secular point of view. It throws out your utopian dreams. It makes you feel that life is meaningless. But if in the end, you know, everything's going to be all right, what a difference that makes to the balance of your psychology. So however weird the mythology of apocalypticism is, it is actually in the service of your psychology, of your psyche, of your soul, giving it something to think deeply about rather than just leave you, you know, with bits and pieces of a fragmented world.
Well, turning to news this week that some would think has a millenarian flavour, Prime Minister Scott Morrison says he's considering moving Australia's embassy in Israel to the disputed holy city of Jerusalem. Robin Whittaker, who are the Christian Zionists and why would they support this move?
Christian Zionists are those who believe quite literally in passages in the Older Testament that talk about there being a gathering at the end of time in the holy city, and that will be the place to which the Messiah will return, in other words, come back down to Jerusalem.
And this is particularly prevalent amongst some American evangelical Christians?
That's right. We get this weird agreement about the political importance of Jerusalem from Christian Zionists and the religious right, the conservative evangelicals in America, and therefore they're strong supporters of the state of Israel.
Because they see a Jewish presence in the Holy Land as a precondition for the Messiah's return?
That's right. So the fact that there's a mosque where the temple used to be, and this theology is developed beyond the biblical tradition, but the idea is the temple needs to be rebuilt and the Jews need to have control of Jerusalem, because only when those preconditions are met can the Messiah return.
And the mosque, the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Haram al-Sharif, the Temple Mount as Israelis call it, is the third holiest site in Islam. If that were destroyed, well, there would be World War III, which, funnily enough, matches prophecy.
Yes, it all gets a little bit tied up. But, I mean, the one thing I would say about Christian Zionism is it can look a lot like support of Israel, but in fact is quite subversive, because the ultimate vision is that Jews themselves would be converted. It's not a true support of Judaism on its own terms.
And Professor Gary Trump, the Israeli government welcomes the support of Christian Zionists politically, even though theologically the Christian Zionists think the Jews are speeding up their entrance into hell unless they convert to Christianity and take Jesus as their saviour.
Look, this is a complicated story because Christian Zionism is very old. And so you have more distinguished members of Christian Zionism in the 19th century that roll over in their graves.
What's the problem with the contemporary Christian Zionism?
Well, the use of all this prophetic material, particularly out of Ezekiel, that's coming out of the Tanakh or the Old Testament, you know, that strange conservative American apocalypticism and conspiracy theory as well, sometimes.
Okay, back immediately.